It is 3 o'clock in the morning on a frigid December night in the year 1888. Inside a Spitalfields lodging house, 12 weary souls lie on a stone floor, their bodies huddled together for warmth. Among them is Ellen Collins, a 42-year-old woman who appears far older than her years. She awakens, shivering in damp clothes, her breath visible in the icy air. The stench of unwashed bodies permeates the room, a grim reminder of urban poverty's harsh reality. Outside, the wealth of London stands in stark contrast to the destitution within these walls. The opulence enjoyed by the privileged few is a world away from the cold, damp existence of the underclass. Ellen's struggle for survival encapsulates the dire conditions faced by countless others in this sprawling metropolis, where hope is a distant memory. Welcome to our documentary, where we will take an in-depth look at the stark realities of Victorian poverty. In the 1880s, London emerged as the largest city in history, boasting a staggering 5 million residents and the immense wealth of the British Empire. Yet, amidst this grandeur lies a dark truth. The East End, home to 900,000 individuals, reveals a contrasting narrative of despair and suffering. Here, families endure dire conditions, struggling to survive in overcrowded tenements with limited access to basic necessities. The wealth of the city stands in stark contrast to the severe poverty faced by its underclass. This documentary aims to shine a light on these injustices, exploring the lives of those trapped in this cycle of poverty and the societal structures that perpetuate their suffering. Join us as we uncover the hidden stories of Victorian London. In the heart of Victorian London, we meet three individuals whose lives starkly contrast against the backdrop of the city's wealth. Ellen Collins, a 42-year-old matchbox maker, struggles daily to make ends meet, earning meagre wages that barely suffice for survival. Her hands, calloused from labour, tell the story of relentless work in a world that offers little compassion. Next, we have Henry Barton, a hopeful dock worker, tirelessly searching for employment amidst the bustling ports. Each day, he faces uncertainty, embodying the plight of many who seek dignity in labour, yet find only despair. Lastly, there is Caroline Drake, a wealthy woman enjoying the luxuries of life, oblivious to the struggles of those around her. Together, they illustrate the vast class divide in Victorian London, highlighting the harsh realities faced by the underprivileged in stark contrast to the comfort of the affluent. In the East End, overcrowded tenements house families in squalid conditions, with multiple occupants crammed into single rooms. Basic amenities are virtually non-existent, as residents struggle with inadequate sanitation and limited access to clean water. The stench of decay and despair permeates the air, a stark reminder of the harsh realities faced by the impoverished. In contrast, the West End boasts well-maintained streets lined with elegant homes, where the wealthy enjoy a life of comfort and privilege. This glaring disparity highlights the ignorance of the middle class, who often remain oblivious to the suffering just a short distance away. While the affluent indulge in leisure, the poor toil in relentless poverty, their struggles largely unseen. This divide not only reflects economic inequality, but also a societal indifference that perpetuates the cycle of hardship for those trapped in the East End's tenements. Ellen Collins toils endlessly in a matchbox factory, her long hours yielding a meagre paycheck that barely sustains her. Each day, she faces the harsh reality of working for little pay, her hands raw from labour, and her spirit worn down by the relentless grind of poverty. Meanwhile, Henry Barton wanders the docks, grappling with the uncertainty of finding work. The fear of unemployment looms over him, a constant reminder of his precarious situation. Together, they embody the crawler class, a term coined by Charles Booth to describe those living in extreme poverty. This class struggles to survive in a society that often overlooks their plight. Ellen and Henry's daily lives are marked by hardship, illustrating the stark divide between their existence and the wealth that surrounds them in Victorian London. Their stories reflect the broader issues of systemic inequality and the relentless fight for survival. The economic policies of the Victorian era, particularly the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, perpetuated poverty by making assistance nearly unattainable. This act reformed the existing poor laws, imposing stringent conditions that discouraged the needy from seeking help. Workhouses, intended as a solution, were instead designed to deter the poor from applying for aid. The conditions within these institutions were harsh and dehumanizing, with overcrowding and inadequate resources. This created a cycle of desperation, as individuals faced the choice between enduring extreme hardship or entering a workhouse, which offered little hope for improvement. The stigma associated with seeking help compounded their struggles, leading many to suffer in silence. Consequently, these policies not only failed to alleviate poverty, but also entrenched it, trapping generations in a relentless cycle of deprivation and despair, further exacerbating the plight of the urban poor. The relentless grip of poverty takes a severe physical toll on both Ellen and Henry. Malnutrition becomes their constant companion, leading to weakened immune systems and chronic health issues. Ellen, often skipping meals, suffers from fatigue and illness, while Henry's search for work leaves him malnourished and vulnerable. The high prices for basic necessities force them to make impossible choices, sacrificing nutrition for mere survival. A loaf of bread costs more than they can afford, highlighting the economic burden that poverty imposes. Each day, they face the degradation of their living conditions, where the lack of proper food exacerbates their health struggles. The cycle of poverty tightens its hold, as their weakened bodies become a testament to the harsh realities of their existence. Ellen and Henry's plight illustrates how poverty not only robs them of resources, but also deteriorates their very health and well-being. In August 1888, the brutal murder of Marianne Nichols in Whitechapel sent shockwaves through the middle class. This horrific incident not only horrified the public, but also shone a harsh light on the pervasive poverty in the East End. For many, it was a wake-up call, prompting journalists to delve deeper into the grim realities faced by those living in destitution. Investigative reports began to emerge, uncovering the squalid living conditions that the poor endured daily. The stark contrast between the lives of the wealthy and the struggles of the impoverished became undeniable. Journalists documented the overcrowded tenements, lack of sanitation, and the desperate plight of families trying to survive. This newfound attention sparked discussions about the urgent need for social reform, highlighting how a single tragedy could illuminate the systemic failures that allowed such poverty to persist in the shadows of Victorian London. Reporters who ventured into the East End uncovered harrowing realities faced by the crawler class. They documented appalling living conditions, with families crammed into squalid tenements, often lacking basic sanitation. The statistics were staggering. Infant mortality rates soared to 150 deaths per 1,000 live births, a stark contrast to the affluent neighborhoods where such tragedies were virtually unheard of. Health crises plagued the urban poor, with diseases like cholera and tuberculosis rampant due to malnutrition and overcrowding. Meanwhile, the wealthy enjoyed lives of comfort and security, oblivious to the struggles of those just streets away. This shocking disparity revealed not only the physical toll of poverty, but also the moral indifference of society. As journalists shone a light on these issues, they sparked conversations about the urgent need for reform, yet the chasm between the rich and poor continued to widen. Ellen Collins begins her day at dawn, her body aching from the cold stone floor where she slept. With little food in her belly, she prepares for another day of piecework in the matchbox factory. Each hour spent laboring earns her a pittance, barely enough to cover the cost of bread. The relentless cycle of work and hunger leaves her vulnerable to exploitation as employers take advantage of her desperation. Ellen's hands are raw and blistered, a testament to the harsh realities of casual labor. She often finds herself competing with others for the same meager jobs, a constant reminder of her precarious position. The instability of her income means she cannot afford to fall ill or miss a day of work. Each moment is a struggle for survival, illustrating the grim existence faced by countless others in the unforgiving streets of Victorian London. The psychological toll of poverty is profound, enveloping the lives of the crawlers in a shroud of hopelessness and despair. Each day, They wake to the harsh reality of their existence, feeling trapped in a cycle that seems inescapable. The societal attitudes towards the poor often exacerbate their suffering, with many blaming individuals for their circumstances, rather than acknowledging the systemic failures that contribute to their plight. This blame fosters a sense of isolation and shame, further deepening their despair. The lack of understanding from the middle class perpetuates a narrative that the poor are responsible for their own misfortunes. As a result, the crawlers experience not only economic deprivation, but also a profound emotional burden, feeling invisible and marginalized in a society that chooses to overlook their struggles. This despair is a silent epidemic, affecting their mental health and overall well-being. As the winter of 1888 to 1889 descended upon the East End, brutal cold enveloped the streets, compounding the suffering of its residents. Ellen Collins, already weary from the relentless grind of poverty, faced the bitter chill with little more than tattered clothing to shield her from the elements. Each day became a desperate struggle to find warmth and sustenance. The meager scraps of food she could afford barely kept her alive, while the gnawing hunger forced many into desperate acts. Theft became a common survival tactic, as individuals resorted to stealing just to stave off starvation. For some, the choice of survival sex emerged as a grim necessity, a haunting reflection of the dehumanizing impact of poverty. In this unforgiving winter, hope dwindled, and the fight for survival took on a darker, more desperate tone. As the plight of the poor deepens, violence against them escalates alarmingly. Police harassment becomes a daily reality for many, as officers patrol the streets, viewing the homeless as criminals rather than victims of circumstance. The criminalization of homelessness leads to arrests for mere survival behaviors, such as sleeping in public spaces or seeking shelter. Society largely turns a blind eye, normalizing the suffering of the crawlers, those who have been pushed to the margins. This indifference fosters a culture where the struggles of the impoverished are dismissed and their humanity is overlooked. The systemic failures that perpetuate poverty are rarely acknowledged, allowing the cycle of violence to continue unchecked. As the public becomes desensitized to these harsh realities, the crawlers remain trapped in a web of despair, their voices silenced amidst the growing brutality of their existence. In response to the dire conditions faced by the poor, various social movements emerged, with reformers like Andrew Mearns leading the charge to raise awareness. Mearns and his contemporaries sought to shine a light on the struggles of the impoverished, advocating for change and compassion. They organized campaigns and published reports, hoping to mobilize the middle class to take action. However, despite their efforts, the impact on systemic issues remained limited. The entrenched economic structures and societal attitudes toward poverty resisted meaningful change. Many viewed the poor through a lens of moral failing rather than as victims of circumstance. As a result, while awareness grew, the fundamental causes of poverty persisted, leaving the most vulnerable to continue suffering. This disconnect between awareness and action highlights the challenges reformers faced in addressing the deep-rooted issues of Victorian society. Ellen and Henry's lives continue to unravel as they face relentless losses and health crises. Ellen, already weakened by malnutrition, succumbs to a persistent cough that leaves her gasping for breath, while Henry's search for work becomes increasingly futile, leading to despair. Their children, burdened by the generational trauma of poverty, witness their parents' struggles and feel the weight of hopelessness. The cycle of despair tightens its grip, as each setback deepens their sense of inadequacy and fear. Ellen's attempts to provide for her family become overshadowed by the constant threat of illness and hunger. The emotional toll is profound. Their dreams of a better life fade into the background, replaced by the harsh realities of survival. This generational trauma perpetuates a legacy of poverty, illustrating how systemic failures trap families in a cycle that seems impossible to break. Caroline Drake represents the stark contrast of privilege amidst the struggles of the crawlers. Living in comfort, she engages in charitable efforts, believing her contributions can alleviate the suffering of the poor. However, her well-intentioned actions often fall short, revealing the limitations of middle-class compassion. While she donates clothing and food, these gestures fail to address the root causes of poverty that trap individuals like Ellen and Henry in a cycle of despair. Caroline's perspective is shaped by her comfortable life, leading her to view poverty as a temporary condition rather than a systemic issue. This disconnect highlights how the wealthy can remain oblivious to the harsh realities faced by the underclass. Although her heart is in the right place, Caroline's charitable work often serves as a band-aid solution, neglecting the deeper societal changes needed to truly uplift the impoverished. Class divisions are maintained through a complex web of societal mechanisms that often place moral judgments on the poor. Many view poverty as a personal failing rather than a systemic issue, perpetuating harmful stereotypes that blame individuals for their circumstances. This perspective ignores the structural barriers that inhibit upward mobility, such as inadequate education, limited job opportunities, and discriminatory practices. The narrative surrounding poverty often justifies the status quo, allowing those in power to remain indifferent to the plight of the underclass. Furthermore, societal attitudes create an environment where the poor are seen as undeserving of assistance, reinforcing their marginalization. This cycle of inequality is not just a reflection of economic disparity, but also a manifestation of deeply ingrained beliefs that dehumanize the poor. By perpetuating these judgments, society continues to uphold class divisions and stifle meaningful change. The Jack the Ripper murders in the autumn of 1888 shocked Victorian society, thrusting the East End's dire poverty into the public eye. As the middle class grappled with the horror of the murders, they became acutely aware of the squalid conditions in which the poor lived. This newfound visibility led to a wave of sympathy and minimal reforms, such as the establishment of shelters and charitable organizations. However, these efforts were superficial, failing to tackle the underlying economic structures that perpetuated poverty. The reforms did little to address the systemic issues that kept the underclass trapped in a cycle of deprivation. The middle class, while moved by the plight of the poor, often viewed them through a lens of moral judgment, reinforcing class divisions rather than dismantling the barriers that sustained inequality in society. The legacy of Victorian poverty is profound. As the crawler class transitioned into the unemployed of subsequent decades, this shift marked the beginning of a cycle of despair that persisted through the 20th century. The systemic failures that plagued the working class in the Victorian era did not vanish. Instead, they evolved, leading to continued economic hardship and social exclusion. The societal structures that perpetuated poverty remained largely intact, creating barriers to upward mobility. As the years progressed, the plight of the poor became a persistent issue, necessitating urgent systemic change. The lessons from this era remind us that poverty is not an inevitable fate, but a consequence of deliberate policies and societal neglect. Addressing these historical injustices is essential to dismantling the cycles of poverty that still affect many today, highlighting the need for comprehensive reforms to foster equity and opportunity for all. Reflecting on the history of poverty during the Victorian era reveals that poverty is not a natural condition, but rather a product of systemic choices made by society. The stark disparities between the wealthy and the impoverished were not mere coincidences. They were results of economic policies and societal attitudes that favored the privileged. Today, we see echoes of these historical patterns in contemporary issues of poverty and inequality. The systemic barriers that marginalized communities face continue to perpetuate cycles of despair and hopelessness. It is crucial for viewers to recognize that the legacies of the past still impact our present. By understanding these connections, we can advocate for meaningful change. Addressing poverty requires a collective acknowledgement of its roots in systemic choices, urging us to rethink our approach to social justice and equality for all. Only then can we hope to create a more equitable society for future generations.